session. So hello and welcome to our second BIAN webinar. So it's great to see that there is so much interest in BIAN from banks and from partners around the world. We've had another session that maybe some of you attended, that this was around the BIAN introduction and ING and the way ING leverages their membership in BIAN. So this time our topic is making SOA mature. BIAN helps Credit Suisse to improve its IT. My name is Karen Fischenbeck and I'm Secretary General of BIAN, the Banking Industry Architecture Network, in case you have been wondering what BIAN is. So this is the abbreviation. And it is my great pleasure to facilitate today's session and to introduce you to Claus Hagen. Claus is Head of Integration Architecture at Credit Suisse, and he will share with us how his bank leverages the membership in BIAN as a benchmark for best practices in banking architecture topics. And so it would be interesting for us to know the history, because Credit Suisse is quite advanced in these topics, but they really enjoy being part of this community in order to really share best practices and learn and discuss with other banks. So this is just to let you know, as this was mentioned before, our session will be recorded for others that are unable to attend. And as you may have seen, similar to the ING session that we had about 1 month ago, this will also be uploaded to the BIAN webpage. So if you would like to share this with your colleagues or have another look at it or at the slides, feel free to access the BIAN.org homepage, and you will also find more information around our community. So also, in order to make sure that we have a good quality of the recording, during our session all participants will be muted, but you will have, of course, the opportunity to use the chat function, and you're also welcome to ask your questions at the end of our session, so there will be sufficient time for you to ask your questions directly to Claus, or if you have any questions around BIAN, we'd be happy to respond to them immediately. So our agenda for today is we will start with a short BIAN introduction for those of you who have not been involved and engaged in BIAN before and would like to know more about Banking Industry Architecture Network. Then we will hand over to Credit Suisse and have a quick look at Credit Suisse as a global banking group. Claus will also share with us the SOA experiences at Credit Suisse that I think it's more than 10 years, 13 years that Credit Suisse is focusing on these topics. We will have a look at BIAN benefits for Credit Suisse, so how they leverage the BIAN membership. And of course, we will have a look at the benefits of this community for banks and partners. So let me just start with a quick introduction of BIAN. For those of you who haven't learned about BIAN before, so it was founded about two and a half years ago in 2008 as the Banking Industry Architecture Network, a global and it's also not-for-profit organization. This also has a predecessor that some of you may be aware of that started about 5 years ago, the Industry Value Network for banks. So our focus is really to agree on a common understanding of semantic IT service definitions for the banking industry. So we will also hear about some of our deliverables like the BIAN service landscape, Metamodel, and service definitions, for instance. So the community basically, I think the important element of it is leading banks, like you can see on the right top corner, like Credit Suisse, ING, like UniCredit from Italy, Scotiabank from Canada, Deutsche Bank and Postbank from Germany, Zürcher Cantonal Bank from Switzerland, Standard Bank of South Africa, and Commonwealth Bank of Australia. They share their requirements for services and for service-oriented architecture with the partners that you can see below. And the reason why these banks are active is basically that they would like to actively influence an emerging standard and really make their requirements known, discuss with the partners, and that's sort of influence the portfolio that will be available on the market. So currently we've got 24 members, 9 of them are banks, 7 service providers, and 8 software vendors. And if you would like to learn more about BIAN, I'd like to encourage you to have a look at the BIAN web page, bian.org, and we will also have the opportunity to share with you some other sources of information. So let's have a look at Credit Suisse and how Credit Suisse leverages their membership. So I'd like to hand over to Claus Hagen. As I said, Claus is the head of integration architecture at Credit Suisse, and he will share with you their experiences and also the benefits that this banking group gains from being part of this community. So Claus, the floor is yours.
Hello. Thank you.
I will pull up the first slide of our presentation.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. My presentation has three parts. First, I will talk a bit about Credit Suisse, so you get a rough idea about the company. Then I talk about service-oriented architecture and how we are applying it within our company. And then I will talk about our BIAN engagement and the benefits that we see in supporting BIAN and being supported by BIAN, if I want to put it in these words. So let's start with Credit Suisse. As some of you might know, Credit Suisse is one of the large banks headquartered in Switzerland, actually coming out of Zurich, but being present worldwide with different types of services in the area of banking. We have about 50,000 employees. Roughly 10,000 of these employees are working in IT. And as you see on the pictures on the bottom part of this slide, we're present in 4 major hubs, which is Zurich, Singapore, New York, and London. But we have smaller offices all across the globe, especially in the wealth management and investment banking space. We are active in 3 main areas. The whole area of private banking, which includes wealth management, as well as in the area of Switzerland, retail and commercial banking. Then the area of investment banking with all the services that you expect from a major investment bank. And then asset management, serving mainly institutional clients with all kinds of services in the asset management area. This business footprint and global presence also has an impact on the structure of the IT organization that you can see on this slide here. There are 3 major IT locations where most of the 10,000 people are distributed across, which are New York, London, and Zurich. But then we also have a number of locations where we have only IT but not so much business, like Raleigh, mainly supporting the New York area, like India, where a lot of application development is happening these days, and Singapore, where a lot of development as well as operations are taking place, serving all parts of the bank basically. So it's quite a distributed footprint with applications distributed all over the globe, and also the teams supporting these applications distributed all over the globe. And there you can already see one of the reasons why we are pursuing a service-oriented architecture strategy, because it's much easier with a service-oriented architecture to maintain such a global and distributed footprint than you would have with more traditional architecture approaches. So much for Credit Suisse in the form of an overview. Let's now talk about service-oriented architecture and what Credit Suisse is doing in this space. Basically, the bank has been active in this space for the last 13 years. The first service-oriented architecture initiative was started back in 1998, when the term service-oriented architecture hadn't even been invented by Gartner Group. But later, Gartner did an analysis of what Credit Suisse had done, and you see the quote below, where they basically found that what Credit Suisse did was basically fulfilling the terms that were defined for service-oriented architecture. And the SOA that was developed back in 1998 is still in production today, is now a major element of the architecture of the private banking systems in Zurich. And today there are more than 1,000 services which are invoked more than 20 million times a day to operate all of the private banking business running here in Zurich. After this initial attempt to apply service-oriented architectures, mainly to connect the core systems, which were at that time mainly mainframe-based, with the, at that time, New World based on Java and other distributed platforms. After this successful application of service-oriented architecture, we've applied the pattern several times in other areas. You see two ones mentioned here. One is a global service-oriented architecture which tries to alleviate the differences between our different global private banking backend systems by adding a common service layer on top of each of the backends, and then allowing to add unified front-end systems to these different backends. And also in another case, in our initiative DIMA, where we brought service-oriented architecture into the mainframe by decoupling the internal workings of the mainframe applications and making the mainframe itself more agile. And then there are some other initiatives that are currently going on. I will talk about this a bit later. But to some degree, we see BIAN as the natural extension of this strategy, as a natural next step in the evolution of service-oriented architecture, because we're now going beyond the company internal rules and standards and try to apply service-oriented architecture beyond our own systems and hope for big benefits of this. I will talk about this 2 or 3 slides later. But let's first talk about the main drivers that we have today and about the external and internal factors that make us extend our service-oriented architecture at the moment. I showed in one of the initial slides that Credit Suisse is active in 3 main areas: investment banking, private banking, and asset management. And in fact, until about 5 years ago, these were basically independent units of the organization, or you could even say independent banks with their own IT, with their own systems, and so on. And 5 years ago, the business changed the strategy and said we want to have an integrated bank now because we have many customers which will benefit from an integrated offering by combining services from investment bank, asset management, and private banking. So we created an integrated IT as well. So today we have an IT organization which serves all business areas. And this created a huge potential, on the one hand, for new business offerings for our customers, but also a huge potential for synergies and consolidation across the different systems. Last year we counted our applications and we stopped counting at 7,000. And then the CIO said, you have to reduce this footprint because 7,000 is clearly too much. And we have a lot of redundancies here. For instance, we have alone 600 applications which only are responsible for trading in one or the other form. And we can show that there's a huge potential for consolidation. So there's a big strategic driver within our IT to consolidate the application footprint. The plan is to go down to 3,000. We're now at 6,000, so there's a bit of way to go. But we are convinced that only a service-oriented architecture approach will allow us to get there, right? Because service-oriented architecture gives you the methods in terms of abstraction, in terms of semantic clarity and standardization, which is necessary to really reduce the application footprint, and especially to do so in an evolutionary way with a footprint, this size of the system that we have, we cannot do a big bang replacement of applications. This has to be done gradually, step by step, and this can easiest be done if you are able to hide the system's complexity behind a SOA-based service layer, and then stepwise clean up the system landscape behind the services. So this is our main driver these days, and we're currently working on what we call enterprise SOA, which is a global target architecture which will ultimately allow all the applications that we have worldwide to communicate with each other in a seamless way, but we have still some way to go in this area. On the next slide, you see the high-level target architecture that we are promoting at the moment within our company. It's based on service-oriented architecture and has three elements. One element is component and service orientation, so ultimately all our systems will be service-oriented and offer data access as well as functionality through well-defined and semantically clear-defined services. We combine this with a portal layer on top, which provides user group specific portals which group required functionality for certain groups of users, for instance, customer relationship managers or the financial community or back office staff. And what you usually see is sometimes these different groups use the same application, sometimes they have specialized applications, but they want to have an integrated experience in using these applications, and we try to achieve this with this integrated portal layer. And the portal layer uses a service layer, which we call portal integration layer, to access data and functionality from the basic banking components. And then we also have a service integration layer, which allows these components to exchange data and synchronize information. As a third element, we have business process management, where we offer workflow management solutions which are able to orchestrate the work that is being done on different layers of this stack. On the one hand, you have the orchestration of the user's work based on guiding the user through different user interfaces. On the other hand, you have back office orchestration, where you want to synchronize the work of the different components that are running within your systems. So that's the target state. We have already a larger number of applications which fit into this picture and will gradually adapt many of the existing systems so they fit into this framework and can be used globally and across all divisions. Naturally, these things don't come fast. That's a lesson that we learned when we started working on service-oriented architectures. And an example for this is what you see on this slide. Basically, our experience is it takes considerable time from the point in time when you start an SOA initiative until you really get your investments back. You see here the utilization curve for the Credit Suisse Information Bus, the SOA initiative we started back in 1998. And you see the number of calls on this SOA per month in millions. And as you see, this statistics here starts 2001, when this was, well, a considerably small amount. And it took a few years until 2003, almost 2004, until we really saw a significant increase of utilization. And the reason, at least that's our interpretation, for this delayed increase of utilization was that we first needed to build a critical mass of services. As long as you don't have the critical mass, at least of your important services in place, it will not make sense for many of your client applications to really switch over to your service bus, and they will continue to use other means of communication. And once you have all the important services in place, you will see a rapid increase of utilization, and that's what you see in this curve here. Like I said, today we see 20 to 25 million service calls a day, and basically all of the private banking business out of Zurich now leverages this service-oriented architecture, and all the applications are service-enabled. But it takes some time. So that's one lesson learned. You have to convince your management to be patient until you have returns on investment. There are no quick wins. The other lesson learned, as you grow your service-oriented architecture, we have to think about management and governance. And we found that as we reached 1,000 services, and especially a significant number of service changes and new initiatives to build new services, we had to create some tool support for continuously being able to manage this. Unfortunately, we didn't find anything on the market, so we had to build it ourselves. But today we have quite a satisfying solution, which combines a number of use cases around service-oriented architecture. One is obviously the service catalog, in which potential service clients can find all the services by using in different ways. We also offer a design tool which allows service designers to specify the services, and especially to reuse data types, because one of the important aspects of a service-oriented architecture is that you standardize the semantics of the data fields which are delivered through your services. So you need a kind of a dictionary of the most important data types, which can then be used as building blocks for building new services. That's also integrated in the tool. And then we have two aspects of governance. One is the quality review process for new services and changes to services. The other is, and that's something that's often neglected when you start a service-oriented architecture, you have to think about also getting rid of certain services after they are at the end of their lifetime. And that's often the hardest part, like in many other architecture questions as well, because you will have users which still use services, and you have to have the means to really notify them that they should change to newer services once an old service is to be decommissioned. And you want to have tool support to also, if possible, automatically trigger this process of decommissioning services. Finally, what we find useful as well was the addition of code generation capabilities, because it's a huge opportunity once you have all your service designs in machine-readable form in such a repository. You can leverage this to generate code in different forms and reduce the amount of work that your service developers or your service client developers have to do. And this is quite successful in several parts where we offer this these days, that people just specify the services in the catalog and then push a button, and whole web services are generated out of the system. So much for our lessons learned and the types of infrastructure that we added to make SOA scalable, at least internally. And now I would like to switch to the topic of BIAN and why we are engaged in BIAN and what we think are the benefits that we take out of this engagement. First of all, it's important to say that Credit Suisse was one of the founding members of BIAN, and even of the predecessor organization that Karin mentioned. And one of the main drivers from a strategic perspective was that we said, okay, SOA works quite well in our company, but mainly we are applying it today for custom-built applications. So we are applying service-oriented architecture in those areas where we build our own applications, which obviously are many systems, because like many banks, we are building a lot ourselves. But what we see is in the midterm, there will be a shift to standard software also in the financial industry. And we hope that over time, we will be able also to purchase core applications in the financial space from one of the major vendors. Because there are areas which are becoming kind of a commodity and see standardization. So we hope in the future we can buy standard packages here. But the problem with buying standard packages and integrating them, as you will certainly know, is that the integration costs for such a package are often bigger than the purchase costs for the licenses. And the reason are not technical reasons, the reason are mainly semantic reasons, because each package has different semantics of the data it is storing and also of the data it is offering at the integration points. So our big hope with BIAN is that it will standardize exactly these semantics, and that in, say, a few years down the road, we will be able to buy a package from SAP or Sangard or Temenos or some of the other vendors which are part of the BIAN association at the moment, which have a BIAN approved seal on the package, so we know what we get delivered to the services as a standardized semantics and integrates easily with our own systems if they have the BIAN semantics as well, obviously, which brings us to the first important point. We have to make sure that the semantics of our own systems fit with the BIAN semantics, and this is one of the reasons why we engage in some of the working groups that BIAN has started. And that's the next topic I want to talk about. We have deliberately tried to bring our own experts into working groups within BIAN where we have our own strategic initiatives, because we think our own projects and our own internal work will greatly benefit from the active exchange of our experts with the experts from other companies and other banks. And one particular area where we're currently doing this is the area of business partner management. There's a working group for business partner services in BIAN, which is at the moment defining standardized services for business partner data. And our lead architect for business partner is active participating in this working group. And he's at the same time the lead architect for a strategic project that we have at the moment in this area. And I have a bit more information on this on the next slide. It's a multi-year project that replaces a 30-year-old IT infrastructure in the customer data space. Today, like many other banks as well, we don't have a unified view on our customers. Many of the systems are contract-based or relationship-based, but not customer-based. So it's very difficult for our staff to really have this integrated view on customers, especially if they have a more complex partnership with the company and have different types of products. So we need to revise our existing system, and that's an ongoing initiative. And we hope through the active participation, like I said, of our lead architect here in BIAN to have a win-win situation, that he can bring in his expertise and real use cases into the BIAN service design initiatives. At the same time, he can pull out a lot of experience out of the BIAN working group, which directly feeds back into our strategic program. And this has been working quite well for the last almost 3 years now. On the next slide, you see one example, and this also gives you maybe a bit of an idea of what BIAN is working on. I said this initially, one of the biggest value is standardized semantics for services in those areas where banks want to buy standard packages. And here you see one of the deliverables that tries to standardize the semantics around business partner in this case, where the BIAN working group has standardized the relationship of business partners to other key objects in the banking space, and also broken down the business partner object into smaller parts and constituents that make up a business partner in the end, and that need to be managed by a partner data management system, and then also delivered through the services. So we see this as a great value that these semantics are standardized. Like I said, we hope that we can bring this semantic on the one hand into our own new system, which is being built at the moment. And then hopefully also we can in the future easier integrate with packages developed based on the BIAN So this is one big area of benefit, of more midterm and short-term benefit that we see. There's another big area, and that's what I call benchmark against SOA best practices. Like I said, initially, we have experience of about 10 years in the area of service-oriented architecture, but most of it is invented in-house, because when the bank started 13 years ago, there was not much knowledge on the market about service-oriented architecture. So we had to create many things internally and based on the best effort and skills of the people which were available. Now we see a huge takeoff in the recent years around service-oriented architectures in the markets, and we have some of the larger companies in the financial space that do service-oriented architectures in BIAN. So we see that we can basically put our own concepts and solutions to the test by comparing them with what the partners in BIAN are doing, and also by comparing them against the kind of best practice approaches which are now being developed as part of the BIAN offering. To some degree, I see BIAN as kind of the SOA benchmark, at least for the financial industry, and there are many interesting things which are currently being developed as part of the BIAN initiative, which we hope to directly bring into our company, or at least try to adopt our own methodologies and practices around service-oriented architectures. To give you just one example, on this slide, I have a small part of the BIAN Metamodel, which has been developed over the last 2.5 years as part of the BIAN initiative, which is the basis for all the service definition work which is going on in BIAN, and which is constantly being extended and optimized as we speak, literally. And what you see here are a number of very interesting properties that we have now in the BIAN Metamodel. On the one hand, it tries to standardize on the notion of what a service is. An area where we struggled a lot within Credit Suisse, and I'm sure other companies do as well, is that if you look on the market and into the different standardization organizations, there's no common understanding of what a service is and how you would break down a service into different components and how a service relates to an application and to other things. BIAN filtered through all the different standards which are existing on the market and try to come up with a definition which is called the BIAN Metamodel now, which positions services against other notions. And from my perspective, this is very valuable, and we will try to adapt this also within Credit Suisse. And you see some relationships even on this picture, for instance, to business objects, business scenarios, and so on. This Metamodel is also actively synchronized with other important standardization bodies and their metamodels. The slide mentions ISO 20022, which is very relevant for the financial industry, but there are also links to other initiatives like TOGAF, like IFX, where there are also engagements between the BIAN organization and these organizations to come up with a clear description on how the different standards relate. Again, we see this as an important value, that the BIAN Metamodel is integrated in a larger context of different other standards and metamodels, which will again hopefully help us in also adopting these other standards which are existing and are relevant for the financial industry. And finally, another aspect that I see as very positive is that around the BIAN Metamodel, there are a number of very important other artifacts which are currently being developed, such as a service landscape. You can see a first version of the service landscape if you download the published material from the BIAN web page, and there's currently a new revision of this landscape under development, which should be published soon. And this is a very good framework also for a bank, which helps you as a bank to basically put your own service landscape against to see if you've covered all aspects of banking or if there are areas which you haven't covered yet. And another, in addition to this service landscape, a third important asset is a methodology for service design and discovery, which is currently being developed. It's called the How-To Guide, and again, the idea is that this will be also published quite soon. And this really gives you kind of an end-to-end methodology to discover your services and decide on granularity and shape of services. And this is something that was really lacking inside our bank, because all the SOA work we did so far was in many cases driven bottom up. Somebody needed some data from some other system, so people designed a service, and then the service got implemented, but we never could come up with a top-down methodology on how to identify services. BIAN now delivers this, and we hope that this will really help us in the many areas where we are starting to deploy service-oriented architectures to make a head start in supporting the projects in defining their services. So overall, I think after 3 years now, there are a number of very exciting assets which are coming out of the BIAN organization, and we're really looking forward to bringing them into our own company and applying them to make our service-oriented architecture even more mature and benefit in many areas. Yes, and this was all I wanted to tell you to sum up what I told you in the last 30 minutes. I hope it could give you some insight into what Credit Suisse did so far in the area of service-oriented architecture and where we want to go. I mentioned that we are a founding member of BIAN. I hope I could explain to you why we are this founding member and what we see as long-term benefits. And what's important to see, in addition to these long-term benefits, we also have mid- and short-term benefits where we benefit more immediately from being a part of BIAN. And maybe as a last remark, that's also important for us, because otherwise we wouldn't get the funding from our management to really being able to participate actively in the BIAN organization. So we could also convince our management that it really pays off to be a part of BIAN. This ends the presentation I have prepared, and I think we have enough time for questions, if there should be any.
Yeah, so I think I gave it us quite a good picture about Credit Suisse, your expectations, and also your active involvement, as you mentioned, in the business partner area. So before we move to, let's say, more general information about BIAN, and also share with you some, as Claus also mentioned, some of the deliverables that will be shared and published in the near future, are there any immediate questions and comments on Klaus's presentation?
Hello, Claus. This is Sylvie Levac from SAP.
Hello.
You mentioned the business partner, and you mentioned, although we didn't go through it, the service landscape. Can you tell us what business area, the service landscape, and characteristic of the BIAN service landscape you think you expect to draw most benefit from?
Yeah, we try to focus on these areas, like I said, where we have strategic initiatives ongoing, and where we think we need to bring in the service paradigm in order to bring more agility to our own systems. And at the moment, in addition to the business partner area where we are already active, there are three main areas where we need to apply service-oriented architecture, and obviously where we also expect support from BIAN in the future. One is the whole area of reference data. You could see business partner information also as reference data, but there are many other examples of reference data that a bank needs. And this is a type of data where you have a huge benefit of standardizing semantics and internally standardizing your source of data, because you can remove redundancies and improve data quality. So we're currently trying to standardize our services in this space, and would greatly benefit from BIAN also providing even more standardized services here. The other two areas are risk and finance, and this again are cross-cutting areas where basically data comes from all parts of the bank and ultimately has to be delivered into the risk and finance systems of the bank. So again, we see a high leverage factor here, and we see a big benefit if we bring SOA into these areas. And we see already some work that has been done in the risk space as part of the analytics working group, which has been active for quite some time, and we hope that we can also benefit in the finance space in the same way in the future.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Sylvie?
Yes, I would ask you, you just mentioned data governance. Do you expect that BIAN will provide guidance about data governance? Best practices?
I think, yes, to some degree, I think so. I mean, there are already some deliverables there. If you look at the BIAN deliverables, there's a document on governance already which can be downloaded. I think as BIAN moves forward, it will need to maybe invest more in this area, because since all service-oriented architecture is a lot about data and their semantics, there needs to be some amount of governance that you need to apply to make sure that you have the right semantics in the data that you are standardizing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there more questions, immediate questions for Claus?
Yes, please, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Claus, Stefan Canon. I've been working on ISO 20022, and I'd like to know what kind of relationship do you see between ISO 20022 and BIAN?
Maybe this is also something that I could comment on. Or maybe Claus, would you like to start and I jump in?
No, please, Karen, go ahead, please.
Okay. Right, so thanks for your question. I think that's important. So you've probably seen that there is the logo SWIFT as one of the members. And as you are aware, so there's a strong relationship, let's put it that way, between ISO 20022 and SWIFT. And we've got another expert who is currently sitting on the ISO Technical Committee 68 for financial services. So we've got currently 2 people on this technical committee, and the idea or the plan for BIAN is really to apply for a liaison as a liaison for ISO 20022, and we've just started to contact the bodies that are involved with it. For instance, we started as BIAN is an association registered in Germany. We have started to build up a relationship with the national body that is contributing to ISO 20022. But we're also planning to really be able to contribute with regard to semantics, which is currently not or has not been on the ISO scope, but they're moving into that direction. So it's basically also a give and take. So we will be supporting in building up this expertise in semantics, and we'll also be profiting from what ISO standards are there on the market. So for instance, the payments area, they had a closer look at the message standards that are there, and this was done jointly with the SWIFT as BIAN member. So, but there will be more information around that shortly, but we're at the sort of starting the first steps towards an official liaison. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but so currently, if I compare an address, a postal address in ISO 20022 and a postal address in BIAN, it's likely that the two are different.
Well, currently, yeah, Klaus?
No, I hope we can avoid this. There was one very important deliberate decision in BIAN, and it is we don't want to come up with our own type system for the different data types, right? So wherever we need these types, like an address, for instance, we use the ISO 20 or 22 definition and don't try to come up with something else. So that's something we have been doing already. We don't invent own BIAN elementary types for important pieces of data. And I think this is maybe the first area where we already have an ISO 20 or 22 alignment in practice.
Yeah, I think that's a good comment, Klaus. Yeah. So it's basically we're not on this really low-level message level, but we've done some proof of concept really to align and map to existing standards like ISO 20022. So there's a mapping already, which hasn't been published yet, but it was important for us to show that we can map our BIAN deliverables to existing standards like ISO. So whenever there is anything there as existing standards, we will use it. We will not be reinventing the wheel.
Okay, thank you.
Right, are there other immediate questions for Klaus? No, this doesn't seem to be the case. So let me just quickly have or share with you some more information about BIAN. So I think we heard from Klaus that it is a give and take. So I think it was important to learn from Credit Suisse as a bank that is very much mature in service-oriented architecture and architecture topic, really to be able to gain value from being part of this community, because there is a lot of discussions and debate within the different working groups, basically, as Klaus mentioned. So also another area that is important for banks joining, and you've seen Commonwealth Bank of Australia as in the logos, and UniCredit Group, is that more and more banks currently initiate transformation projects. So they try to reduce complexity, and they also try to find ways to share experiences with their peers within the community, so with other experts, with other architects. And basically the overall goal, as Klaus mentioned, is reducing integration costs and minimizing IT risk. So it's reducing integration, and this is where we join forces together, agree on a common language and common semantics, and also work together with existing standards. So this is why the banks are part of this emerging industry standard. And we will hear also more about the BIAN deliverables. So the colleagues in the different working groups, for instance, service landscape, they are currently working on the next version of this landscape, version 1.5, and are currently finalizing this more enhanced version compared to version 1.0 that was published earlier. So you will see a number of service domains that have been validated, really to make sure that we agree on common boundaries of these service domains. And this will come along with a how-to guide and also with an enhanced metamodel. Parts of this has been shown by Klaus during his presentation. So you will hear more about the BIAN deliverables shortly, so probably towards the June-July timeframe. And the colleagues are really working together, finalizing, and we are having this quality assurance process in place, really to make sure that what is being published adheres to our quality criteria. We would be happy to get your feedback on that, and then we will come up with the next version, some additional service domains validated until for version 2.0, which is planned to be published end of this year. So you will hear more about our deliverables. This will be published, of course, it's for BIAN members. There's the opportunity to also leverage and have a look at the work in progress. And the more, of course, the more people contribute to these deliverables, the quicker we will be with regard to finalizing new deliverables that we can again publish and make available on the market. So if you would like to explore BIAN in more detail, there's the opportunity, of course, to visit the BIAN homepage, which you've done already when you registered for the webinar. Of course, we're also happy to arrange individual follow-up sessions. So if you drop me a note, I will get back to you, and we can discuss for yourself what the value would be of your bank or your organization to leverage the BIAN deliverables in the BIAN community. Then there will be also more sessions around BIAN at some of the upcoming events. For instance, the Semantics Technology Conference in San Francisco. We're going to have Dave Frankel as one of the speakers in June 2011 at Cybos Toronto, Canada. This will be done jointly with Swift, who is the organizer of Cybos. There will be presentations at this event. And of course, you will see more and more member-hosted events like organized by the different BIAN members. So if you have the opportunity, feel free to join these and let us know. So we will be happy to share with you the latest updates. Then I would like to draw your attention also to the upcoming webinars. For instance, the next one on May 24, the business partner results. I think we've seen Credit Suisse's view on this topic. We will see how one of the BIAN member partners have adopted the results and are using that. Then end of June, we're going to have a presentation by Fernbach, which is more focusing on the lending deliverables. And you will see more information also with regards to the recordings on the BIAN webinar page. Then finally, I'll just try to pull up the last slide. If you have any questions related to BIAN or how your organization may benefit from BIAN or could contribute to BIAN, feel free to drop me a note, and I will be happy to get back to you. So I would like to thank you for your time, for your interest.